or more manageable.
Yeah.
She took that on her cruise. They went for a cruise for her 50th birthday.
Oh yeah.
Around
nice.
the Channel Isles. Not Channel Isles, Canary Islands, Tenerife.
Oh yeah. Oh nice.
Finished up in Madeira. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah, nice.
yeah. Yeah. A bit warmer than the Channel Islands.
Well, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'll give it my regards anyway.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Oh.
Hi everyone. Is there any news this week that anyone has?
No.
No, that's fine. I don't really have much myself. I haven't really been looking at the news. I've just been looking at articles, etc. But what we're looking at today, because Peter, we're starting a new lot now, so I've decided to change it from medieval to just Wales and Welsh history in general. So today I thought I'd look at Pembrokeshire and look at all the prehistoric history there. So I'll start today. Apologies for being slow today. Oh, Carl, screen sharing's not available. Laptop is just giving me grief at the moment. It has moments where it's an angel to me and then it decides to wind me up a little bit further. So I don't get along with technology at all. I just press buttons and hope for the best. And I think I've got it working, so that's quite good. Just going to close my window a minute. So yes, this is a very small, brief, overview really of just little things that I've looked at and have intrigued me, and some of the things that have been in the news quite recently. And I've looked at a few articles with that, and I've looked at a few excavation reports, and I thought, because I'm looking so much into archaeology cambrensis and a lot of other articles and reports that I can't use in my dissertation, I thought it would be a shame not to actually share it on and just talk about some of the things. So I thought I'd ease in with this, and I'm sure we would visit this area again because there's so much to look at. And I think the archaeology of Wales is so rich. We all know that. And I think sometimes we have this issue of things being destroyed. There was something I've seen quite recently, actually, which I'll discuss with, because I think it would be quite good for members to be involved with, is there's a public consultation going on. I'm trying to look at all the message because there's so much of it. But from what it looks like, that there was a new discovery near Pontypridd of cup marks in stone, and is at threat of being destroyed. So I'm looking into all that and all the information provided, because this person has put so much on there. And I think people are starting to have this interest in Welsh archaeology and history, and they want to protect it. And I think what needs to be done is to all band together to try and protect it. But so far, I think what we do have, we don't really have much of. Carl has argued before in some of the other classes that we have so much archaeology in archives or just out there that we know what they are, but we haven't gone so much into it. And so we don't really have much idea of what's going on. And sometimes we just need to look at our archives. Even just looking at the landscape around you, there's so much around us that we haven't even just scratched the surface on. And I think it is showing how Welsh history, and especially prehistory, is so important to the people of Wales, especially because it's entwined with our myths and legends. And when I think of Wales, when I went to Cornwall for the first time, it was a really, I can't explain, it was a really nice feeling. It was very magical, and I loved looking at all the archaeology. It was just everywhere. It was thriving. And I could feel the same sort of sense of Wales in some sort of way. And I think that's why I've now got a love for Cornwall, because it's similar. And I think we can learn a lot from Cornwall as well in terms of our history, use them as an example, as a case study. But that's just something for people to in the future to maybe look on and discuss, because there is so much discussion with prehistoric monuments and the theories of farming and dairy farming, etc. And I think everyone needs to just look at it all and really think of something, really get down to what it means. So I think the academic community has thrived on talk about this. When you look at archaeology Cambrensis alone, which are reports, you can have the 1800s one or the 1900s one, and that's all on the National Library of Wales, and you can access that for free. But when you look through it, there is so much on there, even down to just where people are just documenting what they're seeing, and then later on is more scientific investigation. I absolutely love it, because I think there's things in there that we have information on that you can't really find with a quick Google search. And I think, again, that frustrates me on another level. But I think what we see here is that Wales is taking pride in their early archaeology, when you have people calling to protect these types of sites all over Wales. And I think it does bring the need of maybe the government and Cadw should step up more to look at all this. I can't remember exactly what, but I had a friend, he knows quite a lot of what's going on with just plans and ideas thrown about, and he basically said that there's something going on and that basically Cadw's working on it. So hopefully we see more work from communities. I know Dig Ventures is another one. They do a lot of work. There is a lot of communities starting to form, but I think it's just ensuring that it keeps the interest of people. And I think the discussions that we do see really brings it back to the ordinary person, Welsh life, how things panned out. And I think that's what brings the interest more. I always like to look at how the ordinary person lived, or what life was like in these periods, and just looking at things like pottery. And I think that's where it sparks a lot of interest, especially when you go on the Portable Antiquity Scheme online. They have so much of what people have found. They can tell you so much about just early life in Wales. So I think this is something that we all need to think to just take admiration for and just stand back and admire it all. So this is something that I also saw, and I thought it would be quite interesting to talk about, because it was something that I've heard of before, but never really went into it. Haven't really gone into prehistory as much in my school years.
Bye.
Oh, hi, Carl. I think now is where I'm starting to actually explore it more, and I think you definitely see a relation as well with way people work on things. And I think it's just something that I just like looking into. I think it's something that I've loved looking into with archaeology Cambrensis, and it's so frustrating when you have to be strict with yourself and think, oh, I have to look for what I need, rather than looking at things that I really want to look into and appreciate. Now I have a reason for it. This hill fort, you can see it today, is on the site of the St David's Peninsula, and it's about 33 to 65 feet above the surrounding area, and is about 1 mile west of St David's. And this is these rocky hill outcrops contains evidence of Neolithic and Iron Age settlements here. And a lot of people have had a lot of discussion in terms of this. They believe that there was a spring nearby here as well, from looking at other investigations. But there was an excavation in 1902 by Sabine Bear in Gold, and by Andre Williams, the Ancient Monuments Introspect in 1943. So it was quite interesting that this has brought a lot of interest from people early on, but I think it's something that would have so much potential to possibly be looked into further, especially when you just look into archives and you sometimes look at work of what people have found beforehand, and maybe we know a little bit more and we can add to it. I think that's something to actually go down. This is something that has beautiful scenery all around it, and there is public access, and you can have a look at all this. So there was excavations 1902 and 1943 as well, but the 1943 one wasn't that extensive. And this was thought to be, this outcrop became a stronghold of a 6th century Irish pirate named Bioa, whom is now got this name, but so it is keeping up with time. And that's what I like about settlements, is that you don't just see them have these random names. They have relation into Welsh history, and it's almost like it tells you more about it. So this is evidence of a Neolithic settlement in Wales, and this is extremely rare. So definitely something of interest and something that people have come to and enjoyed. And I like that, because it is something to enjoy. I think you can learn so much about it. And when you learn about hill forts, they were not used as centres of trade or dwelling, but they were able to protect agricultural animals as well. And they were an invaluable source of food and drink for these people. So it can tell us a lot. And there was an associated midden that had been dated around about 5,550 years before present, during the early to middle Neolithic period. And this allowed them to actually map out how much this was occupied. And in 1903, they were starting to find evidence of rectangular and circular Neolithic dwellings here as well. And I'll show you a reconstruction of that in a minute. Because it is, I like looking at reconstructions sometimes. It is good to look at the landscape, but sometimes reconstructions, I think, really just bring it to life to me. Sometimes you can sit there and really pick it apart and it spoils it, but it's good to get an idea. But that was something that's been created and discussed quite often. There was sherds of Neolithic round bottom pottery that was found there. You had polished stone axes who was being found, animal bones, which were also discovered. I think I read something along the lines of someone saying, "Oh, it really annoyed me, this sort of discussion." But it was a discussion about how, because they found some axes nearby, they were just trying to stop invasion. But I just generally think that it was just a way of living, and that's how people lived. It's just simple. I don't know why it has to go to violence all the time. But you see that with some people. I think they just like to go down that route because it's just fill in the gap in the historiography in a way. Here's Pat. Hi, Pat. We're looking at prehistoric Pembrokeshire as well, so that's what we're doing. And they found that there was no hearths found within the dwellings, but there was charcoal deposits found on the site, indicating that there was fire used, and it was carefully managed by them as well. And they were able to radiocarbon date in 1973, which gave the date of 2370 BP. Which was 2,370 years BP. And this is considered acceptable, and basically is considered unacceptable by the National Museum of Wales. There is a discussion on that the radiocarbon dating weren't taken out properly, or it wasn't that effective, so they don't really think it's that credible. But it would be nice if someone was able to do that again, because I know we have had advancements in technology, and this is the beauty, really, because even though you have sites that could already be discussed, just using radiocarbon dating can tell you so much. I'm just going to get a drink a minute. And I think just going to things like this, just stands and everything, sometimes you try and picture things, and well, that's what I do. And so I wouldn't, if I went, I'd normally have an image like this one that was in my mind to try and picture what it would have been like. And you can see that people are enjoying life there, but that some of the reconstructions, I don't know about the ones in the back, they don't really look that rectangular to me, so maybe it's not a complete accurate one, but it is a stab at it. And I think it just sort of paints what life is. But in the Iron Age, it's carried on with life, and they started to see that there was a a defensive structure being built. So this is where we get the idea of the hill fort, and the outcrops southern part was further enclosed by stone walls and roughly rectangular and measuring about 280 feet by 100 feet. And it was built in a dry stone wall from stone rubble and earth. And so that you could start to see how they're picking up defences. It's going to another level. There's this developing. I think that's what I like to see with prehistory, is that when you compare it throughout periods, you get a sense of how life develops. I think that's why I've always liked St Fagans as a child, because you do get to see how life develops throughout time, and especially those row of houses that go up every 50 years. And I think you end up in around about the 80s or something like that. And I just think I just used to like it as a kid because it was just something that could really show me. And I think you can definitely see that when you see things develop. But this is a fantastic reconstruction. You can just almost try and imagine what life was like there and just see how this would have been thriving with people long ago. So we get to this one. This one was in the news. This one's very important. I think this one I had to discuss because this was something that I was talking about quite a lot with some people in the class. I've read a few things. I have an article in front of me as well that was discussing all of this. And I just liked it because at one point it felt like Wales was in the archaeology news quite a bit at one point. It was just things coming out all the time, and I'm still seeing that when you see that in near Tenby they have found some medieval brooches. And I think I think we're starting to see now how there is some curiosity and interest in Welsh archaeology, that people are having these projects and producing some fantastic things to put on the map for Wales. I think it definitely will bring people who are interested in this sort of thing over. And I think it just adds to the beauty and magic of Wales as well. When you go to these places, you just think it's fantastic, especially how you look at how big those stones are as well. So I had to mention this. I think this will sort of, I'd like to see what Karl has to say. I know he doesn't really like talk of Stonehenge, and he does go down that road today. But I just wanted to have that discussion really, because and see what everyone thinks about it. So it's a few meters east of Cardigan Bay. There was a 4-year project, and it was, I think, August of this year where things started coming out about it, where they were actually sharing their investigations. And you see how this is a chambered tomb that was found, and they started to find more information than just this this chambered tomb. This was given also, this name is also, it means Toad's Hall, which is stemmed from the early medieval historian and geographer Gerald of Wales. And I like that again because I like looking at the Gerald of Wales and just the way he just talks about the landscape of Wales as well. It's fantastic that we have some nice early medieval evidence of what Wales looked like at the time. And so you definitely see how things like this start having their own little names with meanings behind it, because it's interactive with history. I think with archaeology, it's not just separate, even though they're not occupied throughout history. They're still interacting with each other, and you see where the early medieval period is now interacting with this period. And this site is given the date of 3100 BC. But a lot of people have been talking about this in terms of course, dairy farming, Neolithic dairy farming, which is thought to be not the earliest, but maybe the earliest known evidence of dairy farming. And just looking at articles of it, you really do have an interest. I think one article that's quite good from our magazine is called Current Archaeology, and you do get a lot of information from that. And that's where I think my interest sparked really, and I think they've done another cover on it coming up to this month if you are interested. And this is where they're sort of talking about how this is special. This is something that's really part of Welsh life, and something that people have interacted with for years. But they talk about how important this chamber tomb is. However, they go on to tell on why this is so important now, this site. And this is fantastic, because on the capstone there is rock art on there, but I tried to get an image of it and I was just driving up the wall and I realised I was looking at the wrong thing. It was this here, which we'll talk about. And they were seeing how there was evidence of how this landscape was exploited by Neolithic communities who utilised the area for rich food resources available, and gathered beach pebbles to make flint and church tools. And one thing that they're still, I think, lacking on is the evidence of a settlement. I know they have evidence of people interacting with the landscape, living in the landscape, taking from the landscape, but settling in the landscape is what they haven't found yet. And this is a burial monument which is much ruined because of farming. This would have been covered over with earth, and this would have been damaged by farmers, etc. And it is a shame, really, but it's nice that it's now getting this attention. And so the shape of it is obviously distorted. So some people are arguing that how are we meant to know much about this when we're not really seeing what it used to be like? And that's why people are talking about the Geralds of Wales, because they want to know what he saw, but obviously it's not very detailed description. And the distinctive features of what we see of 75 cut marks along with several gouged lines. This was published in the Royal Commission Inventory in 1925, and this formed the original focus of the project almost a century later. Between 2015 and 2019, the research programme that was put forward focused on the capstone rock art itself. And they carried out a survey, earthwork survey of the monument, which not only recorded in the situ stone elements, but also revealed to researchers the extent of the mound and how much big this capstone was. I'll show you an image in a bit, because it is fantastic. But when you look at it from top, you can see how, although this looks like it's standing up, you can see that it's collapsed completely, which is a shame. But they're getting a lot of information from this. And so they started to see that there was buried anomalies that was 50 metres north of the monument in this targeted excavation that they were doing. And so after discussing this, where they started discussing that maybe this site is meant to, this rock art was meant to represent the night sky with the stars and maybe shooting stars. But again, this is just theories, and I think you definitely see how the sky in the night is something that is a big part of prehistoric monuments. And when you look at the anomalies on the actual scan that they did, you can see how they definitely had to jump on this, and I'm glad that they did. This has taken them a lot of research and time to actually discover all this, but I'm glad that they did, and it didn't go to waste and that it was damaged. It was a scheduled monument, by the way, in 1927, but we do not know of any antiquarian excavation, but we know the site had been an attraction to early scholars. And so they were talking about these engravings, where they were talking about how maybe this was just thought to be family members. Each family member had put their own cut mark in there. Maybe the lines had meant something else, but people really were talking about it. People were saying maybe is to for memory of the dead. Maybe they just said that this was just some sort of artwork. But it's nice that you see that there's a discussion. But after this discussion, this is where they started to have the excavation, and they started to find some fantastic things. And when you look at the images online, you can definitely see how extensive this excavation was, because they were finding shallow pits where they were finding evidence of dairy farming. So one of them was the pottery. This was a big tip, because pottery in this area really survives in the area of Wales because of the acidity of the local soil. They only found 34 pieces of this pottery, and you can see that there's some decoration on there as well. It's absolutely fantastic when you look at it, and you can see that it's a very delicate piece as well, so you can understand the need to want to protect this. But Trench 1 itself just produced 34 pieces of this pottery. And they found on these bits of pottery there was traces of burnt on food residues. There was also evidence of what the pot once held, and this is where they start to find this residue of fat they find in butter and cheese and yogurt. And so they decided that this was the earliest form evidence of dairy farming that they know, but they have argued that they could possibly be earlier as well. And in Trench 2, they found remains of a linear ditch or a gully, which is and some post holes as well. So they think that maybe this could be seen as some building that was there. But they also found a flint blade in Trench 1, but it was very poorly damaged, and so all they have really is an image of what it was, rather than just seeing something where people are actually holding it, because I think that's really delicate and that's what they needed to do. But we're starting to get a rich piece of evidence with all of this that we're looking at in our archaeology and history. And you definitely see how they take all of this to be radiocarbon dated. But when they look at Trench 1 with the 34 fragment pottery, they were able to look for organic residue analysis. Like I said, they were finding evidence of this dairy farming. They were also seeing how these vessels were coil constructed and contained visible quartz and stone fragment inclusions as well. And I think that, again, is something that's fantastic, because you're getting more idea of what the pottery looked like in that period. I think I've got a book on pottery, and so it goes through all the history of pottery, and I think very little is known about Welsh pottery as well in general. I think more attention needs to be on it, especially with the medieval period. A lot of people talk about this Glamorgan glaze and other things as well, and you just get frustrated because no one seems to have pinpointed exactly where it is or where they think it is, but hey ho. But it's nice that we've added this to our collection, really, so we can discuss it further. But I don't know if any of you can see my screen. I'll see if I can just try and get this article up for you. It is the piece of pottery that they have that has been burnt on the bottom, and the top is just where they're seeing the decoration. These are just different angles that we're seeing of this. And it's just, I just love it. I just love looking at pottery, because I think this is something that everyone has in everyday life, really. And so what they were looking at is this was also a coarseware fabric with rudimentary decoration around the rim, the neck, and the base. And recovering the pottery was said by the people on the site, which was Emmanuel Casanova, in the radiocarbon dating factory. They were basically just saying how this was fantastic because it was exciting. It was an exciting development, especially because they didn't really think the acidity was going to ensure that pottery and any bone, which they did find animal bone, was going to be protected or even available. But they also found burnt on food residues as well, and they think that this indicated that this was a cooking vessel. And you have Dr. Julie Dunn as well, who was an organic geochemistry unit in the University of Bristol, who looked at all this, who looked at the fats and the oils and the waxes of the natural world, and actually came to this idea, like I said, of dairy farming. She even looked at the isotopic analysis of these residues. And I think it just shows how there's this production of dairy farming. They haven't pinpointed whether it was cows or sheep or goats. So again, that's something that we don't know and could have painted a bigger picture for us. And it seems that this was a lot of youth that had gone under. And I know the University of Bristol has really taken part into this to actually try and help piece together the information. And I think they've taken a lot of pride in that with Wales to actually know what's going on. And they also argued that this could have been evidence of a feast as well, with a cooking vessel, etc., that maybe there was a big feast that was going on. Maybe this was evidence so that with animal husbandry came a more reliable food source. And as well as new foodstuffs, including dairy products, were being used at this area. Why pots containing milk, butter or cheese were brought to this area, this monument, is not known, but people are thinking that because there was no domestic settlement identified yet, that people think that they would come into this ritualized landscape and possibly having feasts during events, and maybe leave a kind of offering, and maybe buttering up supernatural forces. And this is just something that we're able to piece together from 5,000 years ago, and is a nice discussion. I think it again, even though that has no evidence of maybe the factory itself, or not factory, the industry itself, where it is coming from, or no evidence of people living, I think it also just shows us just what people held dear to them. Like, we have our events nowadays with Christmas, etc. And I think you can just imagine if there was a special event that's held dearly to them, like we do with Christmas, maybe it'd be nice to actually think of them all there feasting and actually leaving behind something, like we leave something behind for Father Christmas. I guess you can just sort of relate in a way, in some sort of weird way, and just try and think of maybe people coming together and actually enjoying the event, and actually having a ritual, a ceremony together. And I think that's just a sense of community, really. And I think that's what makes it even more special. It's not just dairy farming that we're seeing, but we're also seeing a community coming together under one belief. And we'll move on to the next one, if my slides want to work. Yeah, this is a fantastic photo that I saw online, something that I haven't taken myself, unfortunately. It was a very nice thing to look at, and definitely something that I thought would be quite interesting to talk about. So we know about the quarrying of the bluestones, and so we will talk a little bit into that, because the last story was something that was in the news quite recently, and so was the bluestones. But I thought, give focus to this site because it's absolutely fantastic how tall it is, and you know, just with the sky, you can actually have a sense of love. And I think you definitely see how these monuments actually make these sites even more beautiful, even more fantastic to actually look at. And I think it gives it a different type of atmosphere. And the name basically means John's Village, really, and is a name of an ancient manor in the community. But this is where we're starting. It's east of Newport as well, in Pembrokeshire. So this gives the name to the largest and best preserved Neolithic dolmen in Wales, and is really impressive. There was excavations here from 1936 to 37 and 1958 to 59. The archaeologist was William Francis Grimes here. The condition, like I said, is excellent. Public access as well. And this is where people are actually having a lot of discussion. There is a lot of discussion in terms of this as well. And this was studied by early travellers and antiquarians, and became as famous as the image of became famous as it was almost an image of ancient Wales. And George Owen wrote in enthusiastic terms in 1603, and Richard Tongue painted it in 1836. So it has had interested people throughout history. And they decided to protect this, and it was passed in 1882 because they understood the need to protect this. And 2 years after this act, this first Ancient Monuments Act, Augustus Pists Rivers, Britain's first inspector of ancient monuments, made a visit and produced a sketch of the plans of the monument. And the legal protection of the act that was given was limited, and it became an offence to remove stones or items from the site, but the owner of the monument was exempt from any prosecution. So this is where people get a little bit annoyed, really. And so there was a commissioner of works that would become as a guardian of this scheduled monument, and ensure that it was remained in good condition in private ownership. And there's this interest then that sparked archaeological excavations. Like I said, there's 2 lots of them by the same person. And he said that there was rows of ritual pits which lay under the mound and therefore must predate it. And curbstones for the mound were also found, but not in a complete sequence, and aligned more with the pit than the stone chamber. Very few items were found in the excavation, other than some flint flakes and a small amount of Welsh Western pottery as well. So I like how we're having this discussion of Welsh pottery, and is something that we can collect and I think it would be nice to have a database where you can see what each one identifies as, and maybe just sort of bring the attention of people to maybe try and pair them together and try and understand if there's any trades going on as well, because I just love pottery. But this is absolutely fantastic. So you can see how this excavation just revealed this fantastic capstone. However, we didn't really find much information in terms of that, so no remains were found. And they have a lot of reconstructions online. It's been dated to about 3,500 BC. But this outline neatly outlines the frames of the Presili Hills towering above the source of famous Pembrokeshire bluestones that is thought to be used on this burial chamber and Stonehenge. And they think that this was a multi-phase monument, like I've said, with 3 major periods being used. And a lot of people think that there is some evidence nearby. There's thought to be individual burials that would have been made within the stone chamber, which would have been reused throughout time as well. But there was no traces of bones, like I said. So it is quite interesting. They think that maybe the bones were transferred to somewhere else, maybe to the tombs nearby, or buried in some other way. And when you look at the map, you can definitely see how there's a lot of nearby Neolithic sites as well that could be of interest. And I think it just shows how there's a lot of potential archaeology just standing there waiting to be discovered. But there was an alternative theory that was produced by Cummins and Richards in 2013, which provided maybe an explanation to the monument. They identified several distinctive attributes shared by the class of monument known as dolmens, which was particularly well exemplified with this site. And they have this large capstone derived from glacial erratic, or far bigger than what was required or sensible if the aim was a roof or a chamber. And this capstone was flat underside. And sometimes there was it been arrived by splitting the rock at other sides, and thought to be moved southwest to this area, and it was pecked off using stone tools. The capstone is supported by these tapering tips of slender uprights, and there's often stones within a group that play no part in holding the capstone, so it results in an effect of this normal this large stone to just be floating in the air almost. And you definitely get that sort of sense really when you look at it. And when you do stand under these sorts of things, it does feel like it is floating and that it could fall at any moment. But these stones were never designed to be buried in. They said that within a mound, they thought this chamber could have contained bones, but they think that maybe this was something to be ritualistic. But this could also demonstrate the status and skill of the builders themselves, and maybe add a significance to the place of this area as well. So there is a lot of discussion, a lot of people discussing this, a lot of people have tried to discuss the construction as well, and a lot of people are connecting this now with Stonehenge as well. So we'll look into further, but we'll definitely look at this one here. Because this is a quarry that's been people's interest, and there's something called sinews you can look at, and this was brought out in 2019 February. So this is while they're still talking about this as well, and we definitely how this is developed. And I know I have a little bit of these stones up on my shelf, and this is thought where the blue stones had come from. And this is thought to be exciting. Professor Mike Parker Pearson, which was a researcher of the Institute of Archaeology at University College London, who said this was exciting. This was unlocking Stonehenge's greatest mystery of where these stones had come from so far. And when you do look on the map, you do think, oh, this could have been quite a way that has come from to go there, but people are believing that this is evidence of possible trade with these stones. And this was for to look into it because they're starting to see what's so special about this area 5,000 years ago. And they started to see that these stone circles, these important stone circles, were being built before blue stones were moved to Stonehenge, and they were using this. And so they saw that this was the largest quarry found about 180 miles away from Stonehenge on the outcrop of Godog on the north slope of the Preseli Hills. And this area has a lot of archaeology in it as well, and can tell us a lot about prehistory as well. And this was starting to be discussed because they started to see how there was also a lot of another type of indigenous rock that's also found in Stonehenge. And I know a lot of people seem to think that this is not the right answer. And I think it's still a good discussion to have, still quite interesting. I do like seeing these theories where people come out with these things, and it does raise your eyebrows, and it absolutely looks fantastic to look at. And you can see where they're doing an excavation there to try and find out more information. But it was this Neolithic quarry that these workers would only insert wedges into the ready-made joints between the pillars and then lower each pillar onto the foot of the outcrop. Because they would ease off the rock face by opening up the vertical joint between each pillar as well. So they're using natural vertical pillars of this rock. And most of their equipment is thought to be perishable ropes and wooden wedges, mallets and levers, and they left behind other tools such as a hammerstone and stone wedges here that allowed archaeologists to pinpoint this to be a place where this was seeing a lot of quarrying to be done in the Neolithic period. And they think the stone wedges are made of imported mudstone, which is much softer than these pillars that we're seeing here. And they even had an engineering college suggesting that the hammering in a hard wedge would have created stress fractures, causing the thin pillars to crack. Using a soft wedge means that if anything was to break, it would be the wedge and not the pillar. So they're really thinking of this. So you can see the trial and errors working here, and there's a development in the industry. And I think this is why it makes me laugh when you see things where they say, oh, Wales didn't have pottery in the early medieval period or have trade in the early medieval period, when we have evidence in our prehistory that we were advanced and we knew what we were doing with trade, and we knew what we were doing with industry, and we knew what we were doing and I think there's a lot of there's not enough credit, I think, being put on Wales and what we can do, and this definitely really puts it out there. And I think it was nice that we've seen all of this, because at one point it was just seeing Wales in the news, and it was nice to read, really, because not a lot of people have these interests. And there was thought that there was this platform then that was being found. So there was archaeological excavations at the foot of both of the outcrops, which had uncovered remains of this man-made stone and earth platforms, with each platform's outer edge terminating into a vertical drop about 1 metre. And they think that these bluestone pillars would be eased down onto this platform, which had acted as a loading bay for lowering them into wooden sledges before dragging them away. But you can just imagine just dragging it all the way where Stonehenge is. That would be a bit of a job, wouldn't it? Very tiring as well. But they recovered pieces of charcoal, which they were able to date as well to about 3,000 years BC. So they're definitely seeing how this was something that was used as a possible loading bay, but they're starting to see how there was a hollowed out area of this track where this heavy pillar was being put on these to be carried away, and it was just creating a dip in the floor. And they were also ending up to just theorise this was something of interest in terms of Stonehenge and just the trades and how it was built. And I wanted to just bring focus to this one as well, because I think it's absolutely beautiful to look at in terms of just how it is with the landscape. So we'll have a quick little discussion about this one here. This is King's Quoit, I think that's how you say it. But this is a sub-megalith, and something that when you look online, you don't actually see much information about it, and it's actually quite frustrating, really, because you can't really dig deep, whereas it's almost like it's been hidden. And it's these two small side stones to support this striking capstone on the floor in this small Neolithic chambered tomb. And this tomb is beautifully perched here, that is able to look over the bay and across to the castle. And it's a very unusual site because it's supported by these by the sloping hillside on one end and only partly by 3 small upright stones. And it seems that it had grown there organically in a way. But they had a look in there because there was discussions that this was a burial of a warrior. But when they had a look, there was no remains found, which is unfortunate, really. And they didn't really find many remains. They didn't really find much. This is just evidence here where we have something that is being discussed, is being part of mythology, because they say that at certain points you can come here and make a wish and it will come true. And it's part of mythology and our legend. We're still trying to find information of it, and not much is written about it. So I just wanted to bring that up to people's attention, really, because it just shows how fantastic it is. Is projecting out of the hillside about 4 meters, and then is about 2.5 meters wide and 0.5 meters thick, and it seems to point out to the bay like some sort of giant finger pointing, really. And they're all local red sandstone as well. The inner chamber formed by the capstone is about 0.8 meters high and is below ground level. So this is something that people visit. I think people come here for the scenery, for the views. But was this a place for a warrior to be buried, or was this a place where Neolithic builders would just sit and watch the world go by and just sort of wanted to make a memory of this beautiful landscape, and that they appreciated the landscape around them and they just wanted to appreciate that? Was it a way of them showing off their building skills? We're not sure. And there's not really much to discuss about this, really. But when you look at the medieval castle nearby, there was an early medieval church on the hillside, just inland of this here. So it seems like it's almost like it's kept its magic in terms of this discussions of an early medieval church nearby this quote as well. So it's a shame that not much has been discussed, but I think it hasn't really been discussed that much for us to know about, but we still know some, but I think it's definitely beautiful to look at. And I wanted to bring us to this one here because it was quite interesting. This was an excavation report that I had read ages ago, and this was about 2010. And I thought it was quite an interesting piece to look at because they were looking at this area and they were finding this unburnt rock. They were starting to see that there was earliest evidence of this pottery making pits on the site. I think they were, again, this is more to our industry, more that we can find out from. They were finding a pit of fire, cracked stones and other charred material. And they think that this was possible evidence of this being a very earliest feature in South Wales of Neolithic evidence, but they think that this was possibly evidence of just also life nearby. But they have put a report through and they found bits of pottery there, but it wasn't much at all. And some people were arguing that maybe this was pottery being created. But I think that's absolutely fantastic if that's the case, because the ceramics found on the site could be evidence of this pottery making. But there was post holes found in this Chalcolithic period. And again, this has led people to think that maybe this was a building of industry of pottery making, or maybe this was where people were living as well. But when you look at it online, they've done a very good job with documenting every little piece that they had found and having a discussion. They're able to tell you how the pottery is all over the place and it has this beautiful decoration on there. And they don't show the evidence of the pottery, which was really frustrating to me, but they were able to show how there was a section and the pottery is very small. It isn't that much. It's about that small, but you can see how it's scattered in amongst this layer. And they're just showing off how there is a lot of rich archaeology here and they're still trying to find as much as they can. They had a look for residue like they did with the dairy farming. But however, there was some residue on the residue on there. But they couldn't really, because of how small it was, they couldn't really decipher whether it was a dairy source or not. But they were able to see that there was a radiometric date on the bread and wheat grain that they had found, which was about 2,460 to 2,360 BC, or even a little bit later from 2,350 to 2,130 BC. But this was between, and they think that this was also showing evidence that this was also damaged due to plough action in the area. But in the Bronze Age, they're starting to find evidence well through these subsoils, where they're starting to see that there's also circular pits being created, and it's the same sort of thing that's going on there. They also looked at the residue of the vessels that was found from this period, and they think that this was about 1,890 to 1,660 BC, and that was given a 95 probability. So they were able to date the Bronze Age a little bit better, and they were saying how there was also this piece of short-lived hazel charcoal there as well. And they give you images of the half section. You definitely see how the Bronze Age, things are a lot less fragmented and a lot more bigger pieces are being found. They are still finding post holes, but when you look at the plan of the post holes, it really is hard to try and see what was there, because they just seem to be random, and I think they're still investigating. This is something that people still have an interest, and there was even evidence of medieval and post-medieval in this area. So I think it definitely shows how these areas are very close to they merge into communities throughout history, and their purposes change or their stories change. It's absolutely fantastic to see. And I think this area of archaeology provides a wider context for all of us. I think we can definitely see evidence of trade. We can see how advanced Wales was in terms of making pottery, in terms of how they were able to create industry through farming, and how people had banded together for rituals and have feasts as well based on the industry that helped them thrive. And I think the myth and legend of prehistoric history in Wales just adds to its beauty. I think it just shows how it stays with Welsh people for centuries, and that we can have this evidence of an area just having different phases throughout the archaeology can show us how it's developed throughout time, and is definitely something that I actually love looking at, because you definitely see how Welsh life has developed throughout time. And I think, again, that's why I like St Fagans. So I'll stop share, and I'll ask Peter, is there anything that you'd like to ask or add?
Oh yes, the first hill fort you showed to us. Just below there is White Sands Bay, and they're currently excavating a large burial area there.
Yeah.
And they're finding quite a bit of a new burial area, if you like.
Yeah.
We spent many summers just underneath that. I walked up over those hills, over that hill fort many times. And then on St David's Head, of course, you've got the rings of stones and the defence wall, with the gateway through the defence wall. That's all there to be seen.
Yeah.
So they're medieval bones.
And over at Mill Bay, there they found masses of flint chips, but the flints came from Ireland. They weren't the flints themselves weren't local, but the chipping of them and the making of the tools from them was all local.
Yeah.
And the people there, the bodies of the people they found, were none of them were actually injured by any form of violence. So it's thought they were very peaceful living people, and peaceful farmers.
Yeah.
So that all bears that up.
Yeah, and I like that interpretation of them being peaceful as well, because they're not savage animals. They're just people living in a different time period to us, and I think it gives them more humanity as well. So thank you for that, Peter. And the excavations that are going on around there, they're also really interesting to look at. I just love how they're pulling so much from this area at the moment.
We spent so many times just sitting on those sand dunes that they're digging up at the moment.
Yeah, and it just boggles your mind, really, because you sat on top of it.
Yeah,
it's to do with the climate, but to do with the rough weather we've had, and the bones started coming up on the beach, so they were allowed to excavate. The archaeologists were allowed to excavate, and they were I think they were medieval people.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. But sorry, I was a bit late.
That's all right, Anne.
But yeah, I was interested to see the nearness to the sea, because I was thinking that Stonehenge is quite landlocked, I suppose, and maybe Priscilla Hills are quite landlocked, but you do see evidence of like in that King's Court, I don't know where that's in Pembrokeshire, is it?
Yes.
And of being close to the sea. So I mean, it's not surprising really that they were later dolmens than the earlier ones, because I expect people moved away from the sea.
Yeah.
Didn't they come closer to the sea as time went on?
Yeah, I think that the sea, I think it's always been important to Wales, and I think we definitely see how it's almost like communities come back to the coast, really, because they see how this allows them to have this good relationship with Ireland that we see throughout history as well, and so it allows us to have trade. I think they definitely see how Wales has great coastal areas that have allowed Wales to thrive, and I think it just shows how Wales understood that and that they were advanced. So thank you for that, Anne. Thank you, and it was nice to see you. I thought you weren't going to turn up at one point, so thank you, Anne.
Lost track of time.
It's all right, and Pete, I also need to remind you that you need to renew. So it's £32 for the next lot, if that's
Again?
okay.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Only just did it.
The 8 weeks of this is the new start of the 8 weeks, so this carries on. Richard as well, is there anything that you'd like to ask or add, or anything that interests you?
No, pretty interesting, you know. I think a lot of these places are on the coast or as near to the coast because that was the easiest way to travel.
Yeah.
You know, and everything was heavily wooded and it was easy to travel by sea then.
The sea was the main means of communication.
Yeah. Rather than go across, you know.
And you definitely see this
land, it was, you know.
Yeah, and like I said, the relationships, I forgot to mention that there was, that Gwynfor Evans talks about, but this relationship that we do have with Cornwall as well, just from the sea. So I think it allows us to create friends and very close friends and strong relationships. The coast is important. I think it stayed with us, with people in South Wales with evidence throughout history as well. So thank you for that, Richard.
Pembrokeshire people have a West Country accent.
Yes.
Pembrokeshire, yeah, they do.
It's really strange, but
my friend Sheila Blick from, and she said her name's Cornish, and she lives in Pembrokeshire.
Yeah, it's fantastic because I think, again, I think it'd be nice to see how, and you definitely see it, that there's scholars from Wales looking at Cornish history and their work that they have, and they've applied it to Wales, and I think Cornwall allows us to grow further in what we know, and so I think it's definitely why we see some scholars working together from those areas, because we have this common interest. It's almost like this familiar thing with both of us. We can definitely feel like we can relate to each other, which is nice, and I think is evidence of that strong relationship as well.
In Solva, you will always see Cornish fishing boats.
Yeah.
A lot of the crabbers would come there early to get the early crabs. And they would be in Solva. And I have actually met Cornish fishermen in Solva.
Oh, right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I like seeing that relation, really. I think that's why I felt so connected as well when I went to Cornwall. And Pat, is there anything that you'd like to ask or add?
No, I've just always been fascinated by these burial chambers. I just think they're amazing. There's something big, there's something old, and you can touch them. And it's just, you know, each one I see, I'm just bowled over.
Yeah.
But, once again, sorry for being late. Company coming and grocery shopping. So
it's okay, Pat. Sometimes life gets in the way. I understand that, but thank you, and thank you everyone as well. And I'll see you next week where we'll look at something else in Welsh history. Roman is what I'm thinking as well next week. And also Karl said to mention his West Wales event in November. Karl, could you say more about that? Because I thought it was in June and not November. Oh, Tally Abbey in Llandovery.
Yeah, I'll mention on the 27th of November at Saturday. We'll meet people at Carmarthen train station, and we'll take people to Tally Abbey, Llandovery Castle, and a burial chamber, which, funnily enough, Pat just mentioned. It's just basically a mini day excursion with me and our little van, which can probably only sit about 5 people. So we'll just make sure it's limited. Anyway, we'll be sent. We're trying to try and get those details out to people soon who might be interested.
Yes, and we also have the trip to Chichester in March, if any of you are interested as well, which really exciting to look at, especially the Roman palace that is there. I think it's also the highlight, but it's this medieval and Roman theme to it all. So if you are interested, let me and Carl know if you want to come. So I'll say goodbye to you all until next week, and we'll be looking at possibly the Roman period in maybe Cardiff area, because I'm just starting to find lots of information there that I'd like to discuss. So I'll see you all next week, and I'll see some of you tomorrow. So take care and look after yourselves.
Bye.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 See you, Pat. Right, that worked out okay. Beth was away anyway. She didn't make it this week, but she's re-registered.
Yes. She did say. I said that we could just send her a link once we get hold of it for her to have a look at it in her own time.
This is basically live, so it's actually, you can just get the link off my YouTube thing.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic. I was thinking of doing that anyway, Carl. And anyone who's watching, like and subscribe. I always say that. Yes, I think that was a great one. And all ready for tomorrow, really, Carl. Not really much to report. I did speak to Rosamond in terms of sorting out a class for Dennis Powis as well, and seems like she's getting more proactive on that than me, because she can talk to people face to face rather than me ringing.
Yeah, I agree. All right then. Well, no, that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, try. The best thing to do is try and get hold of me tomorrow on the other number, and then rather than this, because this is the one I teach with.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Carl. That's fine. I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Okay then. Okay, well done on that tonight, and I'll speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon, Carl. Take care.
Keep being amazing. Take care. Bye.
And you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye. 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 Bye.